All right, 3 major topics in this episode. 3. Now, we're going to go through them after the intro, of course, but I want to welcome you to another Season 3, Episode 3. We're going to go into some pretty interesting Shadow the Script topics. Some have to do with underdogs, some have to do with NIL, and some other stuff. But we're going to get right into it right after the intro. Please enjoy the show. Welcome in. All right, like I said, welcome to the show. You're listening to Shadow the Script. I'm your host, Jared May. So, the topics on hand for today. I want to talk about sports gambling and how it's basically become the media's dirty little secret, if you will. And a lot of people have fallen, for this trap over the past, I would say, 3 or 4 years. And then on top of that, we'll move into kind of like the analytics portion of it all. And, I've attacked analytics before, but not in a way where it kind of covers across all major sports. And so with that comes in some stuff that I'm newly learning about because I was just curious about it. And, at this time of year, like I mentioned in the last episode, there's not a whole lot to talk about. And you look at trending in sports and it's like, Jalen Milroe's pro day. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to talk about how Jalen Milroe ran like a 4.4 in the 40-yard dash. It doesn't seem to interest everyone for an hour. Like, talk about sprinting quarterbacks. But, that third portion of the episode is kind of like the underdog obsession in media. A lot of times you see all these teams, it's like, especially in the NCAA tournament, this year it's a little bit different, but there's always that hero, right? That honestly, truth be told, it's always some like white boy in the corner hitting threes that just appears in the NCAA tournament, and you're just like who is this team? And I think one of them was like South Florida Central University or whatever that was in. I saw a clip of it. I'm like, dude, like where does this come from? This has to be for clicks, like. Check out this Cinderella story right here and, hop in line just because it doesn't have a showcase name. We're going to put Snow White on there, but doesn't mean it's worth a shit. So they might upset a low ranked team, 8th seed versus 9th seed. And then they go and play in the big show. And it's like, well, yeah, that was over. So it's just kind of strange. So we'll go into a little bit of the underdog story and kind of tie it in with some of it has to do with like MLB today. Like Moneyball kind of ties in with that underdog and how the underdog, the media's obsession with it basically distracts you from understanding that the structure of the sport itself is what is causing this. And it embarrasses the quote unquote underdogs. Well, we'll go into that. I was going to talk about the rodeo. If you guys are from Houston, such as I am, the Houston rodeo concluded, I believe, this week. And honestly, the Houston rodeo did a fine job of assembling a roster. A lot of new names that I haven't seen before. You had upcoming stars like Zach Top. I'm not a big Bailey Zimmerman guy, but I know people that are younger than me seem to like him. Riley Green was there, but most, if not all, was either regional to, Houstonians and country music listeners or regional to like Hispanic heritage. So, and I think they had one day for African Americans or something like that for black people. Like, I can't remember who it was, but he was on Black Heritage Day. So they kind of touched every single North Star that you could possibly touch. which was good. Last year it was like Marshmallow's going to be there and Travis Scott wants to take over. And you're like, dude, no, we're just going to keep it. The rodeo, simple as can be, should just be country. That's what the rodeo is. You don't walk in there and see Sexy Red twerking her ass in the dirt. No, you walk in there and you see rodeo cowboys rodeoing. So, by the way, if you are not watching 1923, the Yellowstone prequel series, they have some pretty cool introductions to rodeo. I think it was episode 5 or 4, one of the two. But that's a really fun show to watch, by the way. It's kind of like the Fort Worth stockyards before they, became the Fort Worth stockyards that we know today. It's pretty cool. So yeah, sports gambling, media's dirty little secret, right? So I used to gamble. I used to get on Prize Picks and whatnot and, look at Sleeper, the fantasy football app that I use, and kind of go through there and just kind of play around. I always had a rule, though, with myself to never bet over $25. And I remember, because a lot of times, $20 was like that easy plug and play. Like, I want a 6-leg parlay, put $20 in. If I win, I get $500. And sometimes I would collab it with Hunter and say, all right, let's both put 20 down on your account, and whatever you win, we'll split. So 500 times 2 was 1,000. And I remember my phone was broken one time, and I was trying to get it fixed. And we did that. We put $20 down on each, and Ronald Acuna just hit it like an absolute nuke to left center. We needed him to hit a home run to hit the bet, and he was the final leg. And so I couldn't see the winnings or whatnot, but I was so angry that my phone wasn't working, and then Acuna just hits an absolute potato to left center field, and we freaked out. We kissed, we made up, that kind of thing. Kidding. But so, with that comes like how it applies to the story is a 2020 study by Gangsbury found that in-play betting pushed heavily by the media. It correlated with a Problem Gambling Severity Index. That is a PGSI score of 8.76 for users compared to 3.68 for non-in-play bettors. So basically, a score over 8 basically indicates that you have a problematic gambling problem. And what this media has done with gambling is it has basically driven that addiction. Because I think it was since 2018 or whatever, that's when everything kind of got legalized. And, I know Texas kind of has their prohibitions on it, but across the country, the media all of a sudden went, well, hey, ESPN bet, Thursday night football picks, MLB picks for tonight. Is Spencer Strider throwing over 7.5 strikeouts? Go to the casual fan. Are you betting tonight? Here's my 3 props. And it's just like some random guy. And what I find asinine and hilarious is that a lot of these people that are, that are around the broadcast booth, like David Ortiz and whatnot, like these, I want to bet, ironically, that these people are not betting themselves. They're just using the prop to drive this addiction forward in the sports gambling world, to get the Joe Schmoes to say, oh yeah, well, David Ortiz thinks that Spencer Strider is going to have more than 7.5 strikeouts, so I should put down Spencer Strider for 7.5 strikeouts. And so this kind of comes with the script that we always talk about, and it's harder to script certain sports versus others. But when you look at this, it's like, okay, 90% of bettors who bet on, let's say, Patrick Mahomes over 2.5 touchdowns, 90% put the over. Well, let's go under this time. Or this is where they trick you. 90% went the under on 2.5 touchdowns for Mahomes, which the under, I would argue, is less popular. They make it hit to kind of get you attached to go, oh yeah, I just hit on this bet. I'm going to do that again. And it's kind of like an enticing thrill to get you to keep going. That's what betting is. All it really is losing money. And I've never understood the fact that, and I get it, if you want to go bet out there, go bet. I really don't care. My best friend bets all the time, and I'll help him with it. I don't care. about that. What I'm saying is they're getting away with this narrative that the broadcasters and the analysts up there are actually betting on Saquon Barkley's rushing yards. No, it's a driving force. So Bloomberg then reported in 2021 that U.S. sports betting hit $7 billion in October alone, a 2,000% jump since 2018's legalization ruling. So they're profiting from this heavily. And so just like we talked about in the media, this is outside the world of sports, with, vaccines and chaos, the pharmaceutical companies are profiting off of chaos and whatnot, which incites more chaos to happen so that they can make more of a profit. It's the same thing with gambling. If something starts working and there isn't no much jurisdiction, or jurisdiction has been taken away from it, they're going to drive that force and hammer down that nail as much as they can and squeeze as much money out of the Joe Schmo as they can. That's what they're doing with subscription services. That's what they're doing with gambling. That's what they're doing with advertisements. I mean, hell, thank God you can watch this show. And I understand that I want sponsorships, but thank God I don't hit you with 30 to 1 minute to 2 minute ads while you're watching this and go, well, shit. Like, I can't even enjoy the show without being interrupted by some ad that, is a burden to me. So, like, how can you tailor to your users, right? That's why independent creators are making such a big influence on news, on analytics, on sports, is because depending on who the creator is, they're very personable with the audience. And so with all this being said, those people that are above an 8 in the PGSI, the Problem Gambling Severity Index, like those types of guys, and it's a large percentage, are betting. They're just betting away, betting at any sport. Golf, the Masters is coming up. They're going to put down sports betting props. The drafts, what is the over-under that, what are the odds that Cam Ward is drafted first overall? What team is Shedeur Sanders going to get on? What color is the Gatorade after the Super Bowl? You can go on and on and on. You can bet on everything, and they love it. They love it. The media loves it. The media loves that you're pouring your income into this, especially, people like me who are single, don't have a family or a mortgage or anything like that. I can afford to spend more on gambling. I just choose to gamble on myself with my own golf score and go play golf. I mean, it just depends on the person. But those two reports, they're pretty intriguing. It shows profit and it shows an attack on an addiction that is really, you can call 1-800-GAMBLER all you want, but at the same time, gambling addiction is money. You see that in shows like Suits. You see that in, in different movies and whatnot. Those people are portrayed as like they're suffering from an addiction. And so they're getting away with this. And so a 2023 estimate suggests that 1 to 2% of bettors account for 50% of betting revenue, implying media thrives on a vulnerable minority, which is exactly what I'm saying. While it is a minority, the amount of money that they're putting in, the amount of money that these guys are betting is driving a profit so great, it has surpassed 2,000%. And so, like I said, here's, I guess, where I'll go on like my own little tangent. Presented the facts. Now I kind of want to just talk about how I feel about it. With gambling, when I see out there like on Thursday Night Football, Andrew Whitworth and Ryan Fitzpatrick and them, and they say, well, and it's like two just bad. Usually Thursday Night Football games are awful matchups. And it's like the 4-8 Bears versus the 3-9, we'll go with the 3-9 Browns. And it's a winter game. And it's like, well, these two rookies are going at it or something like that, hypothetically. And they want you to bet on Nick Chubb's carries. It's like, oh, Nick Chubb's back today from his knee injury. They said he's ready to go. He's 100%. I'm going over 12 and a half carries for Nick Chubb. And I'm going to go less than 0.5 interceptions for Caleb Williams. And you're like, okay. So we can find new things to bet on, new things for you to spend your money on, and for you to waste your financial gain on for something that may or may not hit. Now, I've heard the argument before where it's like, Roth IRA is a scam. They don't really know. You don't know who you're investing your money to be invested in. So why would you invest that into that person when you don't know anything about him? He doesn't know anything about you. All you know is that he's going to invest in some stocks or something like that, and it's going to grow, hypothetically. Versus, I know how Caleb Williams plays, especially on a short week. I've seen the analytics. I've done the research. I've watched his college tape. I've watched his lowlights and his highlights. I've seen him play with a full roster with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore and Rome Odunze and Cole Kmet and DeAndre Swift and a repatched offensive line and a new coach that has come in mid-season. He's revamped. He's got energy. I'm going to go with the over because I know this. I see that argument too. I see the argument where it's like, I know more about sports. I know what I'm investing in because I watch the game, because it's my lifestyle. It's a part of my primary interest. So I feel tailored towards betting on these players, betting on these teams, betting on the outcome. And what I do with my money, I have a right to do. I have zero issue with that. What I'm saying is the media has no right to drive an addiction like this without it being known to the public. So when you're over there betting and doing what you think, what is your right to do with your own money, no issue with that. The issue comes with, well, look, we're the media, so we're going to be up here. We're going to be talking right here. Kevin, what you got over there, buddy? What are your picks for tonight? Well, I've got Allen Hutchinson, over 2.5 RBIs tonight. I think he's going to have a fire night. I'm going with the demon time prop, 2.5 RBIs tonight. What about you, Dave? And they just go around the table, and it's like, dude, these guys are not betting. These guys have multi-family homes. They have kids. They have a wife. They're not going to go home to your wife and say, well, damn, like my 6-leg parlay for $6,000 just hit, and now I'm in debt. That's a drastic example. It's like, no, the media is just lying to you. They're toying with you. Like, if you are listening to what they are saying for betting props and whatnot, then you're just a part of this 2,000%, jump, or the $7 billion profit that they're getting, so that they get larger and larger and larger. You can't watch a sporting event without ESPN Bet showing up. And it's always this is a part that I always forget about, and a part where I feel like, I would say most men bet, but there are very, very interesting scammers out there. And I've interacted with a lot of them on Twitter. But these scammers are really hot, sexy women that show off cleavage and their curves, and, they dress in skanky outfits, and they tell you, I'm betting on the money line tonight for the Detroit Lions, and men take those bets. Now, I know there's a side of it where it's like, well, we're just trying to bait them to show more, bait them to interact with us. I understand that. I've played that game before, and I've gotten the interaction that I was hoping for. Really, to truth be told, it's like, oh yeah, boost for engagement. It's like, I'm just trying to get a little laugh in, because I like to use jokes when I'm talking on specifically like on X. But you have let's, for instance, like the walking bets. If you're unfamiliar with this, the walking bets is a chick with ginormous cans just bouncing in your face, and she's like, oh, I've got the money line here on the Detroit Lions, plus 3,500, and I'm also taking Sam Laporta over 6 catches. And what percentage actually goes with what she's talking about, I don't know. But I know that all it is a scam where it's like, hey, look at me. I'm super sexy and I'm pretty and I talk like I know sports. But in fact, I really don't. Anybody can get lucky with betting. You don't have to know shit about sports. All you have to do is press over, under, and get lucky. That's the end all be all. Then you have regional scammers where it's like, well, I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan or I'm a Miami Dolphins fan. And I'll shout and scream and drink and do all this stuff and talk about my team and bet on my team and react to the stuff that happens with my team and then throw some bets out there and then show my winnings every, 2 weeks to say that I won some small amount of money and say, hey, guys, you should follow what I'm saying because I've won something before. If I betted every single day, I guarantee you I'd win something before. But all this is really doing is making them richer. It's the same scam that the media is getting away with. Now, these are creators. So the creators are just playing by the same rules that the media is. Media is getting that 7 billion, 2,000% profit, while the creators are getting that same benefit, but at a much lesser percentage. They're still gaining money from your interactions, from your engagement, from you guys liking and retweeting and quoting and doing all this stuff when they're showing their cleavage and their tits and whatnot. And you're just making them money. So it's interesting to me that, we're dumb enough to fall for this sort of stuff. So that's the issue that takes place for me. That personally, facts aside, that I just look at, I'm like, I just could never go in there and go, yeah, let's throw $2,000 because this chick said so. There's guys that do it too. I mean, I'm sure they just do it in a more respectable fashion. Hats off to the nice young women that are doing this sort of thing where they understand how to get clicks, how to get engagement, how to get interactions. I understand that. It's like the whole argument with, OnlyFans type shit. Well, of course people are going to look at it. When I say people, I say others. But at the same time, what are you going to do? As a guy, what are you going to do? You're just like, hey, I've got my parlay down here in my midsection. Check it out. Start no, it's not going to attract the male audience. Now, if you hit on a bunch of bets, honestly, production is what drives, I would say, male bettors out there that run platforms that, you use their promo code and whatnot. Like they've kind of earned their stripes in such a way. Whereas I feel like with on the women's side, it's we're gonna give you these promo codes because you've driven interaction, not because you've won anything. And I'm sure there are examples they're going to throw out yeah, well, look, I won here. So what do you have to say about that? You don't think I know ball still? And you're like, no, I really don't. I truly don't. Like I mentioned, anybody can win a bet. Anybody. That is the scam right there. The fact that, I get told all the time, just because you know ball doesn't mean you're good at betting. That doesn't make it fun for me then. If anybody can win, if I was because without me knowing any of this stuff, I'd go, well, I know ball. I watch MLB. I understand the game. I've played the game at a high level. I'll go in there and bet what I believe is going to happen. And it just doesn't happen the way you think it's going to happen. And you're like, well, what the heck? I thought that, Bryce Harper going against a bad pitcher, he'd have 2 or 3 hits today, but he went 0 for 5 with 5 strikeouts, and the rest of the team scored, 16 runs. That doesn't make any sense. But an idiot would go in there and go, well, go under on the Bryce Harper thing and didn't even look at who the pitcher was and score a bet. That's my whole point. It doesn't really matter if you know sports or not. Betting is a completely different animal. So, but if there's anything to take away from this, it's the fact that the media and these creators, specifically on the women's side, they're scamming you. The people up there around the booth, they're liars. They don't bet. They don't put money on that type of shit. I understand that some do, but not all. It's all just a ploy to get you to throw out more money and to bet on the ESPN app or to bet on the Sleeper app or to bet on the Price Picks or Better or MGM or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. All of them are the same. Outlooks like The Athletic and The Ringer, now tied to betting firms, subtly shift coverage to favor gambling angles, point spreads or players like over the player stories and whatnot. They're all tied to betting companies now. There's a reason for that. Follow the profit. So yeah, that is kind of your first segment here. Hopefully that made sense. I'm kidding. Of course it did. But now I want to talk about analytics. Analytics, I think there's a good, a bad, and an ugly, to quote Clint Eastwood. And, like my brother is the analyst on our show. He goes through analytics and whatnot and shows us some advanced stats in episodes. I think that is good. And I think there's a difference between advanced statistics. I usually, if I'm going to go by stats, which I try not to do all the time because stats don't tell the full story. But if you're going to go by any stats, especially if you're wanting to win an argument, then you have to kind of use advanced stats. You can't just go completion percentage, yardage thrown, touchdowns, interceptions, boom, I win. No, that's not how it works because it doesn't tell the full story. You could have 40 touchdowns, 7 interceptions with the best roster in the NFL, and then people would go, well, he had the best roster in the NFL. If you take that away, he would do a lot worse. And you're like, well, yeah, but he didn't, so he threw 40 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. Or you could have 33 touchdowns and 14 picks with a bad roster and go, well, you see, he did this good with a bad roster. Imagine him with a better roster, and you go the hypothetical route. There's always a hypothetical involved. But analytics is kind of your way, depending on what you look at for analytics, your way of breaking the chain and saying, because of this evidence, the claim that I have suggested trumps yours because of this. And I've used that for plenty of athletes. But there's a misconception between there. And that misconception is cherry-picked stats. The cherry-picked stats drive me crazy. Up a wall, whatever, however you want to describe it. It's these team Twitter accounts that are like, CJ Stroud against the, under pressure is blah, blah, blah. CJ Stroud threw for, the struggles for CJ Stroud this year were because he had a horrible offensive line. Imagine him with a good offensive line. So don't discredit CJ Stroud because he had a bad offensive line. And they got rid of Laramie Tunzel, the left tackle, because it was a bad offensive line. They knew they had to make an adjustment. Slowick, the offensive coordinator, was the problem the whole time. So CJ Stroud is actually still, Christ reincarnated. And it's like, okay, and I'm not trying to attack CJ Stroud specifically. I'm just, it's the one that came to mind. But these accounts will they cherry pick these stats to say, well, he's good at this. But then they don't look at, you've got A, B, and C, but you don't have the rest of the alphabet in there. So here's a couple examples. Here's a player that is talked about a lot, I guess in certain friend circles and whatnot. If you're sitting around the table and you see those podcasts, those super talented podcasts where, we're going to just name a player and just name others and guess which one is better without any evidence. We'll just say who's better, and the comments will sound off on it. We'll get engagement. Super talented, right? All right, who's better? T. Higgins or T. Higgins or Zay Flowers? And then they just go through like 12 different, wide receivers and whatnot compared to T. Higgins, and then it just gets nowhere. Like nothing was accomplished. It was just like 6 people's opinions, but there is no actual factual evidence to suggest their claim. It's just opinions. And that's fine. I'm just saying, as someone who is analytical as me, I can't look at there and go, well, it's just like, you're not supporting any type. It's like going into a courtroom and going, because I said so. Well, what are your sources, Jared? Me. Trust me, bro. Like, that's basically what it is. Instead of going, why do you believe Jalen Hurts is not a top 5 quarterback? And you go X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F. And then someone else goes, QRC, whatever, and just all these different angles are presented, and then you determine who wins an argument based on the factual evidence. I like that. I like that approach and saying, well, in 2023 and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, back to what I was saying. A player that is mentioned a lot is Tua Tagovailoa for the Miami Dolphins. To me, Tua is kind of not a stat patter, but he's in a scenario where the offensive-minded head coach has tailored speed around an entire offense, ironically, with a play caller that has one of the weakest arms in the NFL. And a lot of times, people look at Tua and go, well, his accuracy is what is, the separator. And so you look at here, it's like, ESPN hypes up Tua Tagovailoa oftentimes. It's like 105.5 QB rating, third best in the NFL in 2022. Talking about if he's MVP worthy and whatnot, but ignoring that his 8.9 yards per attempt were, leaned heavily on Tyreek Hill's league-leading 1,700 receiving yards. Not to mention, Jalen Waddle on that roster as well. And you fast forward to today, I know he's dealt with a lot of concussions and whatnot, but a lot of it is based on hypothetical. It's like, if you put Tua in this scenario, then he's going to be putting up MVP numbers, but because he didn't have one piece of the puzzle that was 99% completed, we're not going to get the best of Tua. And the cherry pick stats are always like the simple ones that are just kind of shown side-by-side comparison. My favorites are like anything with Derek Carr. It's like you put Derek Carr's completion percentage and his passing yards thrown and his touchdowns and his career and whatnot. And you're like, yeah, he's a pretty good quarterback. Then you watch him play and there's a 2.5 minute, montage of his lowlights essentially of where he can't complete a red zone touchdown pass, or that he hasn't made the playoffs in forever, or that you watch him and you're like, this dude's just hanging on to the ball and nothing happens. Or you watch him and he's throwing hospital balls to Chris Olave the entire time. And you're like, yeah, he's a great dude, but he's not one of the best, NFL quarterbacks out there. And for him to put side by side by the people they're comparing him to is flat out annoying and just engagement for clicks. And I promise, as a creator, I'll never do that. And it's just like overblown efficiency. And they do this with, a lot of times it's quarterbacks, right? Because quarterbacks are the most looked at. But other than that, it's usually receivers. Deebo Samuel on in routes and slant routes in the NFL since 2022. He's number 1 ranked. Deebo Samuel rushing yard ranks since 2021. You're like, well, yeah, because he's used like a running back. Deebo Samuel efficiency beneath 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. And then you're like, well, can he run a deep route? And they're like, well, yeah. Look, and they pull up like 6 clips of him catching it from 2021. And you're like, well, yeah, okay, but where is the evidence to support he's done that long lasting, and the evidence that shows that he can do that consistently, and the evidence that shows he can do that as well as the third best receiver on a really good team over here? Where is the evidence that he runs routes like Stevie Johnson, Buffalo Bills GOAT, And I used to troll and say, oh, Deebo is just like Taysom Hill. He's just, Deebo gets the ball more. And everyone was like, and I was trolling, obviously, just trying to make people mad. But then his career started to form a little bit, and I was watching Taysom Hill basically do the exact same thing as Deebo Samuel, almost the exact same production. He just got the ball less. But there's one thing Taysom Hill can do that Deebo can't, which is hilarious to me. It's still fine. I'm still trolling, but is that Taysom Hill can throw the football at an NFL level. So that's funny to me, because you watch Taysom Hill run swing routes, do sweeps, do in routes, slant routes, flat routes, pick routes, and things like that, and just plays that are designed to basically create him to be wide open. And then what he does after the catch is what makes him special. Well, that's the same thing as Deebo, but the cherry pick stats of like the swing routes and the out routes and the RPO efficiency under 5 yards for Deebo is top 1 in the league. It's like, yeah, it's because it's the only thing he can do efficiently. all the other stuff that a wide receiver is bred to do in the NFL, he can't do efficiently, which is why the 49ers, part of the reason why the 49ers dished him away and ate up a little bit of his contract and sent him to the Commanders to a rookie quarterback who can handle his contract, because it's a waste of space. And so then you look at like a Brandon Ayuk on the same team and you watch him play receiver and go, that's what a receiver is supposed to do. And the argument for Debo is, well, just because he does this, that, and the other doesn't mean he's not a good receiver. He's definitely top 10. And it's like, well, dude, every receiver's top 10 these days. But looking at Debo, can you honestly tell me, without an emotional bias, that Debo Samuel is top 10 or top 15? I'm serious. Like, outside of the Kyle Shanahan system, which we are about to see. We're about to see him in a Cliff Kingsbury system. But outside of this Kyle Shanahan tree, where a lot of it's RPO, a lot of it is one read, a lot of it is receivers on the outside blocking for the people on the inside to get them that rack yardage, that run after catch, that yards after catch and whatnot. Outside of that, offense tailored for a guy like Debo, tailored for a guy like CMC, where any running back that has filled the gap for injured Christian McCaffrey has succeeded. You know, we got to look at it not just in a bubble. You have to look at it in a reality. And then you look at, guys like, CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb, advanced statistics and whatnot. It's like, all right, he runs a lot of his routes out of the slot. It's like, okay, well, that's probably what he's most efficient at. No problem with that. But we've seen him play on the outside before. We've seen him catch the long ball before. We've seen him make acrobatic catches. We've seen him have over 100+ yard, 100+ reception seasons on a consistent basis. We've seen him get open when there's no other supporting cast members that help him get open. And then we watch, it's like, well, yeah, he's just getting target fed. It was like, well, he's the only guy out there. So when he wasn't target fed, he was still over 1,000-yard receiver. And his, yards per catch support his claim. His yards after the catch support the claim. He runs bigger than his size. That supports his claim. And, people always want to hate a Dallas Cowboys receiver. And I'm not trying to say that he is super hated. I think he's got the respect he deserves. But hell, 40% of CeeDee Lamb's stats, here's an advanced statistic for you. A large percentage of CeeDee Lamb's stats have come from a backup quarterback because Dak Prescott can't stay healthy. So you're getting Cooper Rush to throw him the damn football. But when Dak's in there, CeeDee Lamb's a different animal. So now he's kind of regarded as a top 5 guy, but to put him in the same weight class, not like explicitly weight class, but the same class as talent pool as Debo Samuel and others like that. It's nonsense. The nomenclature for CeeDee Lamb and others like him are just nowhere near that category. And the scenario supports that claim. Then you kind of move over to let's use a college football example. Michael Penix. He was a Heisman lock with a 161.4 passer efficiency rating. That was top 10 nationally. Yet his team had a $65 million athletic budget, which was top 20 in the NCAA. And elite receivers like Rome Odunze and Jaden Polk and other guys like that. McMillan, I think, was another receiver. And so that padded those numbers, a lot like the Tua Tagovailoa case. And I'm not saying that Michael Penix was a bad quarterback. I'm not saying that he is one. I actually think he's going to be pretty solid in the NFL. I always want to cheer for the lefty quarterbacks out there. I was one of them. Of course, not at a high level, but in high school. Full throttle tape. But what the message is saying here, it's like Louisiana Monroe is $11 million program, couldn't dream of that sort of support. And, in college football with the NIL atmosphere, everything gets a little bit shaky. Everything's a little bit different. But you look at it, it's like in a weaker conference that Washington is in, they basically are running the table. It's kind of like Oregon. Oregon, it runs the table and everybody. Then when, push comes to shove, I understand they performed well against Ohio State this past season, but when push comes to shove, they were the only undefeated team in the college football playoff this past season. And they got blown out of the water by Will Howard in Ohio State, who had struggled during the regular season. And I understand they played similar schedules, but that conference is so big, you can kind of get away with playing anybody. Not get away with playing anybody, but you can avoid tougher opponents. So Michael Penix was, I guess, could have been a product of his schedule. At the time, there wasn't a 12-team playoff. And so you didn't get a chance to kind of showcase, how valuable you were until you played Texas, who was still in the Big 12 at the time. And that was a back-and-forth game and highly anticipated and excited. But with that kind of budget compared to other team in your conference's budget, this is what I'm talking about. That NIL separability, like that split point, that separating factor, that stuff matters when you're looking at analytics. I think a more, what do you want to call it? A more relatable analytic or stat that kind of gets disregarded is, and I wanted to talk about this stat line specifically, is that, have you ever heard of WAR, W-A-R, in baseball? I've never seen a stat based upon essentially a hypothetical. And I've always been a MLB guy, but I've never used WAR as a player measurement. And so you look at, like, in 2021, Bryce Harper, he had a 5.9 WAR as NL MVP, and they used that for his proof. But then his teammate Zach Wheeler, on the same team, had a 7.4 WAR, a 7.4 WAR, and basically didn't get anywhere near the hype. And I understand Bryce Harper, big time name. He actually is my favorite player in the MLB, and he has been for quite some time. But it just kind of shows the discrepancy between the WARs here. Is the team only had 82 wins. But let's go into what WAR is, because I'm not sure everyone understands what it is. It's kind of like, what is that? It's the efficiency stat in EPA in the NFL. It's like efficiency per attempt or something like that. And they use that a lot of times to support the claim that, like, Trevor Lawrence is godsend. But let's look at WAR. So I want to see how is WAR calculated. Here's what is WAR in baseball. So that stands for wins above replacement. It's a single statistic designed to measure a player's total value to their team by estimating how many more wins they contribute compared to a replacement level player. A hypothetical substitute, I literally said it, word for word, hypothetical. A hypothetical substitute who'd be readily available, like a minor leaguer or a bench player. Think of it as a catch-all metric that combines a player's offensive, defensive, and for pitchers, pitching contributions into one number. So the core idea, WAR asks, if this guy wasn't playing, how many fewer games would the team win? A WAR of 5.0 means the player added 5 wins above what a replacement would have done. So here's some key components with WAR. Offense, hits, home runs, walks. That's adjusted for league and park effects. So, if you have like Coors Field in Colorado, that's offensively, it leans it leans towards the offense a whole lot more than almost any other stadium in the MLB. So they take that into account. Defense, fielding ability, often use metrics like defensive run save, DRS, or ultimate zone rating. Base running, stolen bases, advancing on plays, etc., like wild pitches, pitching, runs allowed, innings pitched, adjusted for ballpark and league, positional adjustment, harder positions, shortstops, for example, get a boost over easier ones, first base. So all these things are analytically jumboed together to create essentially a hypothetical scenario. And they've been using this as a measurement for players. And I find it interesting, because I've never used it as one. I've always just kind of watched a player and go, this guy is better than this guy, because if you look at his average, not just his average, if you're looking at specific analytics, WAR is probably the way you're going to go. And there's different variations and calculations of WAR, and you can get into the Moneyball specific reasons for why players are better than others. But baseball, in my opinion, is a very hard sport to be calculated by on a hypothetical, because baseball is the one sport, in my opinion, that you have no control over when your time is. It's why it's very mentally frustrating. It's why it's a game of failure. It's because, you might have 3 runners on base, but your 9th hole batter is up and you have no control over that. Now the MLB is trying to, propose rule changes to change this. But when you look at it, it's like, yeah, I would want Bryce Harper up when there's 3 runners on base, but he's not. He might be one of the runners on base currently at the time, but the driving force is so independently separate versus it being a team sport where you can design something specifically for a player. Like in basketball, you can run a play specifically for LeBron to get an ISO. In football, you can run an RPO or a run play or a screen play. It's specifically designed for your best player to get the football and create space for that athlete to get open. Baseball, you never know when a ball is going to get hit to you. You never know we're going to get pitched a strike. You're never going to know when the strike is coming into you can anticipate it, obviously, but it's so individually branded it's such an individual sport that you really have no control over it. So I've always had a hard time using a stat like WAR to evaluate players. And I guess it's an after the fact sort of stat where it's like, we've seen enough evidence to support that a bench player, somebody that's obviously worse than a starter, wouldn't have much of a win over replacement versus Bryce Harper. Well, obviously. So it just seems like it's a hypothetical, in my opinion. If Bryce Harper wasn't on the starting lineup today, they'd be winning 5 games less with the replacement versus having Bryce Harper in. Well, that's a no-brainer. Of course they're going to win less games. Of course, the WAR for your opening day starter is most likely going to be better than your 4th rotational pitcher or your bullpen guy that started because some of your guys are injured. And he was misplaced in the starting lineup and pitched 3 or 4 innings as a relief pitcher and gave up 5 or 6 runs. And it's like, well, that's not his forte. So does his WAR go down then? If, he pitches 3 to 4 innings, like I mentioned, and gets blown to shreds on almost like a midweek game for college baseball, is your WAR affected then? So I find that interesting. But you look at it, and I like going back to the stats that I had up. It's like Bryce Harper in 2021, it was a 5.9 WAR, which is, by measurement, that's an all-star level win above replacement. Versus, a Zach Wheeler who had a 7.4 win above replacement. So when Zach Wheeler was in, and granted, he starts every 5 games or so, he had a much higher impact versus his replacement than a guy like an everyday starter like Bryce Harper would have. And so, and again, we went through the calculations. It's tailored towards specific positions to kind of even out the playing field. So I'm sure of it, they will use WAR to support the claim that different hitters in baseball are better than they actually are, that different pitchers are better than they actually are, and not actually reading the scenario of which they are currently serving in. So I can see how WAR can be a misled statistic to where you really have to pay close attention, especially if you're going to use it in a conversation to say, Juan Soto's WAR is higher than Bryce Harper's. And you're like, well, Bryce Harper didn't used to play right field. Now he's at first base, or he's a DH. Or Rafael Devers versus Alex Bregman. Well, Alex Bregman might get more WAR because he plays defense and has won a Gold Glove. And Rafael Devers is lower because he's not good at defense, but he's a much better hitter than Alex Bregman. So he should have a higher WAR because he serves only as a DH. It just kind of goes into this mumbo jumbo circle where it gets really confusing. Whereas you can just look at the instrumental impact that just the impact itself that these players have within the game and go from that metric and say, man, every time I've seen Yordan Alvarez in a playoff scenario, he can't get out. He just won't get out. Jose Altuve might bat, 240 during the season, but when it's come playoff time, that dude is on base. He's stealing bags. He's efficient. What is his playoff WAR? That might be a fun one. So I can see how this stat is both, one, fun to play with, and two, it can be misleading. So just be careful with WAR. So now, with this third segment here, and I understand, just I guess one final comment with the analytics and whatnot, I enjoy them. I just think that the cherry pick stats for every sport is what really gets annoying. I see it all the time in the NBA. And I hate the NBA. And I don't pay close attention to it. But I see it, and it's like, this guy's got this, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, well, it's different now. The sport is different now. The culture is different now. You look at baseball, and it's like the averages have gone down because the pitchers have gotten so good. They throw a lot harder these days. I mean, the average starter, I would say, probably throws 97 miles an hour. I feel like that's gone up since we were kids. So it's harder to hit the baseball. There's no more juiced baseballs anymore. The juice era was like, dude, I remember seeing this Texas Rangers lineup. It was insane. Everybody was batting over 320 with 30 bombs and almost 100 RBIs. Like 6 of the 9 rostered players were. And you're like, how did this team not win a World Series? Or look at how loaded there were other teams like this. And that's gone now. Now, I feel like if you're batting 270 in the MLB, you're considered a great, fantastic hitter. So does WAR calculate for that? I don't know. Would WAR be so much different 10 years ago? And then with the NFL, I think it's the most popular for cherry picking stats. And a lot of times with analytics, it's just they find an analytic that they're good at, post it on their Instagram or on their Twitter and say, check out this stat that I found. Here's how it supports my claim. And then just cause a reaction because the player is controversial. So that's what I have an issue with analytics. If you use analytics, especially in football, for the whole grand scheme of things, and then supported your claim, then I have no problem with it, no issue with it. One of my favorite guys to follow on X is Marcus Mosher. He technically is a Dallas Cowboys analyst, if you will. He worked with PFF and whatnot. I think he also covers the Raiders, but he has honest opinions on everybody because, one, he's watched the film, he's checked the PFF grades, he's a part of the PFF grading system. He sees the analytics within the game, and he jumbos that all together and creates an opinion off of it based on factual evidence, based on the numbers. And it's one of the only guys on X that I can actually, with a straight face, go, look at his stuff and go, I can trust this guy because he doesn't have some emotional agenda behind what he's saying. He's just an honest guy. So when people ask him about, upcoming star from Missouri in the draft this year, Luther Burden Jr., he's swearing on him that he's going to be the next big thing because he's seen the works. He's seen the numbers. He's evaluated it. And I trust that because he has no hidden agenda that is just an engagement for clicks. He's an honest guy. That's the way to go with analytics. Now, okay, the underdog story. The last segment before we end the show, right? But this one's interesting, and I'm gonna try and put it in a way that makes sense because I don't think underdogs. Truth be told, I don't think underdogs are bad for the sport. I don't. But the way that the media utilizes underdogs, that's what I believe to be infuriating because the honest fan can watch any sport, check out the underdog, and go, they stand no chance. And every once in a while they win. But, and I get it, it's happened before. But when you look at it from a numbers perspective, from a budget perspective, from a talent perspective, from a coach perspective, all those different tangibles, they really don't stand a chance in any sport. But the media hypes them up to get these clicks and these engagements and to get their viewership and their ratings up. It's how the game is played, right? It's chess, not checkers. I understand that. But it kind of resembles this failure of a structure, and it's hidden in plain sight almost, to say, well, here's a great underdog story, but do you know why they're an underdog? And I think in today's world, it most relates to college football, college sports, really in general, especially, like right now in the March Madness NCAA tournament. There's a ton of talk right now about how NIL has completely changed the ins and outs of players transferring and the loyalty of players and whatnot. Similar to just on a what do you want to call it? A lesser scale than college football is with NIL, the attention that gets, because, football is just the most watched sport in America. I think those reasons with NIL and the loyalty and whatnot that I was saying about, like, the issues within that are so clearly obvious, yet people look at the underdogs and go, yeah, they are underdogs. That's super cool. Like, I want to watch that. Knowing damn well that they don't stand a chance because the budget doesn't allow them to. It's the Moneyball tactic. And I find it interesting that everyone who has watched Moneyball has understood that the little guys don't have any chance of winning. The big spenders have every capable asset in their pocketbook to assemble the greatest roster, such as the Dodgers. And the whole premise of the movie is that we have to find new ways to win. And that's where the whole analytics thing came into play, right? And watching the analytics play out in the movie, we learned that the long term doesn't apply. It's not possible. It's not sustainable. They're not big spenders. You can have one good season every now and then, but the big spenders are going to be right there with you when you're having your good season. And people watch that and go, damn it, Moneyball really taught me that these guys don't stand a chance, and that these other guys, these big spenders, they have every advantage possible. And then they just forget it and just kind of, they watch the movie, they understand the movie, and they understand movies and articles and news that are related to it, but then they just forget it when the media makes you forget it, I should say, when they bring up these Cinderella stories. Oh, look at Appalachian State that put up a fight against this team. It's like, yeah, but they went 3-9. It is, So, anywho, you go into kind of debunking the evidence of it all, right? Here's a college football example for you. In 2017, University of Central Florida, UCF, ESPN dubbed UCF's undefeated 2017 season. They went 13-0. A snubbed underdog tale after missing the college football playoff. But their $59 million budget was mid-tier, not tiny, compared to Power 5 giants like Alabama, whose budget was over $100 million. Since 2010, all 14 college football national champs came from top 15 revenue programs. Underdogs often have more juice than media admits. So this is kind of an underlining tale to say that the underdogs that have painted them, obviously they're not the stage brand, like the top tier premier brand names like Alabama and Tennessee and Georgia and Texas and Oklahoma and all these different people. It's UCF. It's not Florida. It's UCF. So by that law, they're the underdog. When you look at actually what they spent, you're like, maybe they aren't really an underdog. And so I think it's interesting to me with how the budgets of NIL, yes, they've kind of evened out the playing field, but no one is going to be able to compete on a consistent basis like those premier brands that I mentioned. It's not possible. The players coming up through the transfer portal or through high school as 5-star commits, that NIL program, that NIL budget, money talks, especially to an 18-year-old who has never seen, money like that. So who's going to be offering the most money? Now, I applaud the players who see the money and go, well, do I have a chance to start there? Like, yeah, I could take the Arch Manning route and develop. I've covered that before. I think that's great. I think that's a really fantastic way to do it. Now, you only have 1 or 2 years to play and get some film on you, essentially. But at the same time, you learned a program, you committed, and you were one of the few that were loyal. That's a great method. I think more people should follow the Arch Manning method. And I've said that before. Now, for the other players where it's like, I got a chance to play, I come here and I was hurt half the season and other guys stepped up and played and then they got NIL deals themselves. So I'm going to hit the transfer portal and I'm going to go sulk some more money out the rag with a different team in the same conference with a lesser wide receiver roster because I'm going to get to play more. But loyalty has nothing to do with it. It's all about, I want to be strapped for cash and I want to get playing time. But if I'm not really getting playing time, then I have no interest in playing for your, the NIL has basically said you're loyal to the money, not to the team. And I think a lot of people already know that. That's no shadow of the script statement. But when you look at, the underdog story and the obsession of it, the fault lines when you're watching this is that the structure of it all is hidden in plain sight. The fact that team, Kansas, can't compete in football programs versus, Colorado, who has Deion Sanders as their head coach, and he is gaining more and more NIL opportunities because of the premier name that he carries with himself. It makes sense as to why Kansas wouldn't compete with Colorado. Ironically, the underdog story here would be, well, Kansas beat Colorado. But the structure of it all is what the issue is. Anybody can beat anybody on any given day in college football. If I show up, there was a triple option team that almost beat Alabama a couple years ago on a year that Alabama won the national championship. And discussion sparked and said, well, Alabama allowed 28 points to, Georgia Southern or whatever. And then they went out and won the national championship. It's just any given day. Do you show up or do you not show up? But the NIL budget doesn't allow for that to happen very often anymore. It's kind of like when you're watching college football playoff this past year, you see the teams that had the first round bye and the teams that went and played away games and snuck their way into the college football playoff. It was like the easiest decision in the world to say, well, yeah, Penn State's going to knock the crap out of SMU. SMU doesn't have the budget or the depth. SMU may have a fantastic starting lineup that they assembled and developed and got through their budget. But Penn State has third stringers that can start on SMU because of their big brand potential, because of their budget, because they've paid for more depth. And so when SMU goes out there and gets slaughtered by Penn State in the college football playoff, that's the reason why. Now, over time, I'm sure NIL will correct itself, but SMU was an underdog. And so they hyped this up as like SMU's a contender. And I wanted them to be badly. Obviously they're in my home state. But then you got to go all the way up north in the wintertime to play Penn State in a whiteout game? No, it's not happening. The depth that NIL has created for that team has eliminated the underdog factor. So then, another MLB example. Now, MLB is one example that I look at and say, they're trying to implement a salary cap within the MLB, or there's talks of it at least. When you look at it, it drives me crazy because every good player, like Paul Skeens is a perfect example for right now. Paul Skeens, Livy Dunn's boyfriend, Skibbity Toilet. Paul Skeens was announced opening day starter. It's his second year, first full year in the MLB. He was a rookie last year, I believe. He plays for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Have the Pittsburgh Pirates ever been good? In recent memory. And it's like, well, the answer is probably no. They've always sucked, but they've also had some good players along the way. Andrew McCutchen, Paul Skeens currently. I believe Charlie Morton, the Astros pitcher that performed really well when they won the World Series, I believe came from the Pittsburgh Pirates. What they do is they get the good draft picks and they start the good prospects. And then they trade them away, or when it's time to pay up, they can't pay up because they're not a big spender. So they let the big spender take them over, or they trade them over to a big spender because they can handle that upcoming contract and they can go win a World Series. The Pirates only had 60 wins. So I'm sorry, like at the trade deadline, we're trading you away, Paul Skeens. Go win a World Series. Another good prospect will come up through the farm system. We'll develop him into a good MLB player. We'll get a little ticket sales, keep our organization afloat, and then you're going to go play for the Red Sox. Another great example right now. So all I'm saying is get ready for Paul Skeens to be on a different team in the next 2 years. Another good example, the Orioles. The Orioles have one of the youngest rosters in the MLB today, and they're exciting. They've made the playoffs, I think, either the last year or the last 2 years. They got a young starting pitching staff. They got 4 or 5 really good young players. They're not going to be able to pay them all. Now, a fan would go, I would love to keep all these players because you have a winning roster ready to go. Like, this is it. And we just need more time to cook. We need more experience in the playoffs. And then eventually the Orioles will get to the World Series, right? In a city like Baltimore, the Orioles, it just doesn't really happen that often. Well, it's not going to. They're going to be on different teams the next 2 or 3 years, at different points in time. They're not going to be able to pay them. And even when they pay them, they're eventually going to be moved off regardless, because another person will come up and they'll have to pay them. I have to choose sides. Which one am I going to pay? I've already paid this guy, so this guy's going to go to the Dodgers. Alan Rutschman, you're a Yankee. They're going to offer you more money. We're not a big spender. Sorry. But we developed you into this prime premier athlete, and your WAR is above 5 or whatever, like I was mentioning earlier with the advanced analytics. Go play for the Yankees. And then the media will take that and go, oh, Alan Rutschman has an above 5.5 WAR. He's going to be fantastic for the Yankees. And, oh, my God, this is big. Like, the Yankees, are they a favorite to win the World Series again for the 7th year in a row? It's like, it starts to get boring. It kind of ruins the sport, in my opinion, to where it's like the underdog in the MLB and college football specifically. It's like, it doesn't seem possible to me anymore. It's like, and I'll cite the example in the MLB, the 2018 Athletics, Moneyball, right? The 2018 A's with 97 wins on a $66 million payroll, that's low, were hailed as a Moneyball redux. Yet they got swept in the wild card by the $167 million Yankees. Per Baseball Reference, since 2010, no bottom 10 payroll team has won the World Series. Low budget runs fizzle against deep pockets. Media plays up the chase, not the ceiling. Whatever. These last little comments, I don't even understand what they are. But the fact of the matter is, when you're on the bottom, like the bottom of the payroll, like I mentioned, the Orioles, the Athletics, the Pirates, and these teams like that, they're never going to win a World Series against those big spenders. And the big spenders have not fluctuated at all. They stay big spenders because they're premium brands. And now I understand people love watching the premium brands play and they like the jersey sales, but how does that make money for the little guys? I don't even understand how the Athletics are still afloat. I mean, people forget the Athletics are going to be playing on a AAA stadium this year until their Las Vegas stadium. Who is funding the Las Vegas stadium that they're building? That looks awesome, in the pictures and drawings. How in the world are they making this? They haven't been good in like 15 years. They haven't had a player worth a jersey signing in a long time. Matt Olson was great for the Athletics. Guess where he's at now? The Braves. The Braves are really good. Josh Donaldson was pretty good. He came up through the Athletics. Boom, you're a Toronto Blue Jay with Jose Bautista and Edwin Encarnacion. Texas Rangers' own Marcus Semien came up through the Athletics most of his career. Now he's a Ranger. Guess who paid him? The Rangers. And the Rangers were a low-spending team for a couple of years. I mean, they were good for about 3 or 4 years and took like a 10-year spell of where they weren't good at all. But when they got Chris Young as a GM, they started spending a lot more. They paid DeGrom, they paid Seager, they paid Semien, they paid they traded for Scherzer, they paid Evaldi and all these different guys, paid Adolis Garcia. So it honestly, I don't know if it's possible for these MLB spenders to become big spenders. Like, they have budgets, right? You talk about a $66 million payroll. Well, that had to come from somewhere. Jersey sales, merchandise, ticket sales. That I feel like I would assume that stuff matters based upon how much you could pay. It's a team, right? It's an organization. If the organization doesn't drive enough money, you can't spend the players. So that's why teams like the Yankees, the Red Sox, and all these different teams, they spend more. Probably the most fun team to watch, the MLB, if you appreciate, we like good baseball, great managerial staff, great coaches. They're not a big spender, but they've assembled over the last 6 or 7 seasons a great roster that you really don't know any of the names on, but they play really well, and they've made a World Series. That's the Arizona Diamondbacks. Let's look at where they let's see. Where do the Arizona Diamondbacks rank in spending over the last 5 years? Let's check this out. I bet you it's low. But, I can only name just like 2 or 3 players on the Diamondbacks, and one of them is having Tommy John surgery and was in the playoffs when they won the World Series, I believe, Jordan Montgomery for the Texas Rangers, who's now in the Diamondbacks. So they were ranked around 20th, 22nd in 2020. They were ranked around 20th to 23rd in 2021. They were ranked 21st in 2022. They were around 18th to 21st in 2023. Then this past year, they ranked 14th to 15th, which I believe is the year. No, I think that was 2023. Yeah. So every year, they really haven't eclipsed top 15 spending in the MLB. So roughly, their annual average is around 115 to 120 million annually in spending. So it makes sense. That supports my argument. So that's interesting. And you look at all that, and all I'm trying to say is, of course, the underdog MLB is not going to win. You can't pay for enough good players. Now, if coaching can only go so far, I used to be told this in high school all the time. Your character will take you where your talent can't sustain you. Well, sometimes talent is just too much to bear. It's too overwhelming. You can't get past it. It's like playing the Golden State Warriors super team. I don't care how well you're coached, unless, Kawhi Leonard doesn't, break his ankle in that playoff series. Hypothetically, the Spurs could have won, but, that's a great example of your character will take you where your talent can't sustain you. Well, in that case, with a super team or the Dodgers, where they have literally the whole lineup, the whole pitching staff, the whole bullpen, the best closer, the best 9-10 players in the MLB assembled on a roster, all those cats, your talent will take you where your character can't sustain you. is a two-way street. If you have enough talent on a team, you can basically do anything. Character matters, but so anyway, I am a believer that in the MLB, underdogs are irrelevant, and to hype up an underdog story would just be a waste of time and just be a media's way of encouraging clicks and whatnot. And then in the college football, the budgets are too widespread right now and uneven to where, of course, a team in one conference or in a lesser conference is not going to be able to compete, with one in a greater conference. It's just not going to happen. And people wonder why the SEC has a bias. Well, it's because the SEC has the largest spending budgets in NIL versus any other conference. And I haven't even looked that up. I can just tell you for a fact. That's why in the preseason poll, you had all these SEC teams in the top 25. That's why in the preseason poll, or in the current, before the NCAA tournament started for the men's basketball tournament, there were like 9 or 10 SEC teams in the top 25. That's why in college baseball, Texas A&M was the number one preseason ranked baseball team in the country, along with 7, 8, 9, 10 other SEC teams in the top 25. A&M sucks now in baseball, but that's besides the point. The budget and the spending of it all is what supported that claim. And we'll go a little bit deeper into this before we end today's episode. And I'll use my own alumni's example. Texas A&M in 2022, a $30 million recruiting class. This was, I think that this is the year that Texas A&M post NIL landed the number one recruiting class. This is when Jimbo Fisher was currently the head coach for them, with reports suggesting boosters funneled $30 million via NIL deals per The Athletic. Their $95 million athletic budget, top 10 per USA Today, dwarfs mid-majors like Boise State, $45 million, who can't match NIL war chest. Nick Saban's quip about A&M buying players wasn't wrong. Big spenders leverage NIL to hoard talent. So, where did all of this number one recruiting class hype end up? It ended up with an 8-4 season making a bowl game. So, truth be told, really the only thing A&M's been missing over the last 10 years is a quarterback. That's it. You've had great defenses, great edge, great offensive linemen picked in the first and second round, defensive interior players, linebackers, corners, running backs. You had A-Chain, you all these different cats, and nothing to show for it because you don't have anybody to throw them the football. Hell, that was their main problem this past year. Then in 2023, you move on to like Ohio State, a $20 million NIL pool. Ohio State's collected the foundation raised $20 million for NIL per Forbes, dwarfing Iowa's $5 million effort. Ohio State's $251 million athletic revenue, number 2 nationally, fills this gap. Iowa's $130 million, can't compete. Recruits like quarterback Julian Sayin, 5-star 2024, picked Ohio State partly for NIL upside per 247 Sports, showing cash trumps thrift. That's a good way to put it. That's another example, except Ohio State wins. But that's the point. Money talks, spending talks. That eliminates the underdog. Iowa would be considered an underdog. Before NIL, they were kind of always a 9-3 team, pro-style coached organization or program, if you will, that just obviously they never amounted to anything, but because, obviously there was paying under the table long ago, but nowadays Iowa's never going to be able to catch up to those teams. Never. And they have great players, but they don't have the depth that a team like Ohio State, Penn State, Texas, and all those different teams that I've mentioned before would be able to acquire with their, athletic revenue and their spending budgets. God, you look at this and it's like the Dodgers spent $1.2 billion on Ohtani, Yamamoto, and others per spot rack with a $241 million payroll. That's number 3. And then they won the 2024 World Series with that. They're second in 5 years. Compared to the Oakland Athletics, $47 million payroll, the lowest. They finished 69 and 93. Since 2010, 11 of 14 World Series champs were top 10 payrolls. Moneyball's A's peaked at an ALCS loss in 2006. Yeah, I mean, it's right there. It's right there. In the MLB and college football. I mean, it's all right in front of our eyes. And we're like, oh, the underdog. It's like, dude, it's not going to happen. Sure, they can win a regular season game. I mean, but who cares? Long term, they're going to get the shaft. So that's interesting to me. I mean, it drives me up a wall. And I understand premium brands are good for sports in certain ways, and people are tied to them, and people from different states like the Yankees when they're not even from New York, which is annoying, by the way. You know, people always say the worst combination of sports fan would be, you know, the Dallas Cowboys, the Lakers, and the Yankees and the Texas Longhorns. They say that's the worst you can be. And that makes sense. I mean, it's like, oh God, you either hate them or you love them, Dallas Cowboys. You either hate them or you love them, New York Yankees. You either hate them or you love them, you know, Los Angeles Lakers. And you either really hate them or you love them, Texas Longhorns. It's a recipe for disaster. And if you are one of those fans, I pray for you. Genuinely. Okay, I think we shouted the script enough, don't you think? I mean, God, and we're over an hour and 20 minutes here. Just been talking nonstop. But, yeah, man, I mean, I think all that's made sense. I think, you know, over time, this is something that will get increasingly more engagement. Because, I mean, you look back, the gambling, 100% makes sense. Why the media would be pushing that when they make such a profit off of it, right? You know, over $7 billion. And then you look into the analytics of it all. It's like, well, do the analytics represent the efficiency all around of an athlete, or does it cherry pick the stat to support this one narrative that really doesn't get you anywhere besides that one narrative? But people take that in engagement and give people followers and money and whatnot. And it just, that part makes no sense to me. And it's always driving me nuts. It's like, well, you know, Dak Prescott under pressure in 2021 since 2021. It's like, all right, well, what about since 2016? His whole career. Let's look at the whole thing. Because every year is different for every single athlete. I'll go on another tantrum. And then, you know, finally with the NIL and spending and whatnot, like that sort of thing drives me up a wall as well. These are just like three primary target issues where I'm like they're playing you with the gambling. And the analytics are there to support claims all around for athletes, not just your stupid narrative for your Twitter page. And the big spenders are always going to be big spenders. It's never going to change. The underdogs are completely wiped out of the water. Those smaller D1 schools, it's completely wiped out the FCS. It's completely wiped out the small dudes, guys like Boise State, but they can get 2 or 3 different athletes and get them some playing time, but they're never going to be able to fucking compete with the big schools. But it's great. It's all great. It's all wonderful and fantastic, and sports are awesome, and you should bet your life away. Put all your 401k finances on Jalen Hurts scoring a tush-push touchdown. That'll get you everywhere you want to go. There you go. Oh, my God, my 6-leg parlay didn't hit. Yeah, you should be buying groceries. Kidding. Bet if you want to. I really don't care. Okay. We will see y'all next week. Like I said, you got an episode every week. I know it's like tough to find topics and whatnot every now and then, but I've had a lot of fun with season 3 so far. And like I mentioned before, as we get closer to later in the spring and closer to the summer, we've got some guest interviews lined up. I'm still planning those out. I've hinted at that for like a year and a half, but now I'm finally ready to do it. And I think it's going to be so much fun. And you know, I've got some of my brothers are going to be part of the guests. Some of my friends are going to be guest members. You'll probably see them start in May. And we'll start, you know, I can knock out the interviews and then post them at later dates, but you know, that way I can announce it and create some hype for it and whatnot, and just kind of plan it out and schedule it. But I'm going to have a lot of fun with those because, you know, these people they mean a lot to me. I always meant, like I said, I was going to give them a piece of the pie. And, there's not a big pie to give. It's kind of like a little crumb. But, hey, if you want to be on the show and talk, and I think that's what this show should be about. So I'm excited for that. I'm going to find some unique, unscripted stories. And then as we get closer to, obviously the NFL draft's coming up, the Masters is coming up, MLB is starting. If you're listening to this, it's starting today. And then the NFL, as we get closer to the fall, it's game time. Stats and Scars will most likely be back during that time on a more consistent basis and get going. So, all right, happy season 3. You can find us on all platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Shatter the Script. On X, I do post articles here and there. I posted my first one about a week and a half ago about paying your players early. You can also watch our podcast episodes on X as well. Twitter and Instagram, a lot of our video content is typically posted onto there. You'll see some stories about, updating on free agents and whatnot. But most of the time, if you want real-time updates, you should follow my X at Shatter the Script or STS_pod. You can find our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Spotify and YouTube both support video episodes to which we upload in 4K. Audio on Apple Podcasts. Look on Apple Podcast, there's a new place to listen to it at. So the old one, it's a black logo with blue lettering, and it says Shatter the Script on it, obviously. That's where I loaded like almost all of my episodes from seasons 1 and 2. All of them. So the reason for the switch was I couldn't customize anything. I couldn't change the logo. Long story short, I had a subscription service that I'd wanted to cancel, and I don't want to buy it back to change it. So I just kind of wiped it. That's kind of the old podcast. The new one has our current logo on it. It has 3 episodes uploaded already. This would be the 4th. You can find it on there. And please go and rate the show if you get a chance. Give us 5 stars if you like it. Hopefully it is a 5-star show and you like it. And subscribe to that. And that way, all our episodes from here on out will post and upload to there. So, all right. Appreciate y'all's support. We will see y'all next week. And have a great weekend, everybody. And enjoy some MLB season and the end of March Madness and the Masters coming up. All right. See you guys later.